everyone, I'm Stephanie Weaver, author of the upcoming Migraine Relief Plan Cookbook. Welcome back to the Blue and Yellow Kitchen. In each episode, I make a dish inspired by a new book while talking to its author. Today's book is A Face for Picasso, and I'm making spaghetti with marinara sauce. I'd like to welcome Ariel Henley, author of the memoir, A Face for Picasso. Welcome, Ariel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So give us an overview of your memoir.
Yeah, so my memoir, A Face for Picasso, is about my identical twin sister Dan and I growing up with facial differences as a result of Crouzon syndrome, which is a craniofacial condition where the bones in the head don't grow. So from the time we were 8 months old on through high school, we had regular surgeries to expand our skulls and move things around on our faces to kind of get them to where they were, supposed to be had we not been born with Crouzon syndrome. And so it was a really, traumatic experience to grow up, not only just in and out of the hospital, but to grow up with a face that we didn't really identify with, since our appearance was changing a lot. And so this story is just about our relationship, our experiences with surgeries, growing up in a beauty-obsessed society with faces that were different, and kind of just what that meant for us.
Absolutely. It's such an incredible book, everyone, so that's why I wanted to feature it. Can you explain the title for us and its multiple meanings?
Yeah, so when my twin sister and I were kids, we were interviewed by the French edition of Marie Claire, and in the article, they compared our faces to works of Picasso. And I found that article a few years later after a summer of really intense operations that, again, changed what both my sister and I looked like. And it was the summer before seventh grade, which is a really difficult time already. And so I already was at a place where I didn't identify with what I looked like. And I was really angry about what I was going through and how people were treating me. And so then to find this article that compared my face to a Picasso painting felt extra insulting because I didn't identify that way. And as someone who grew up really believing that my appearance is who I am, being compared to a Picasso painting in a sort of dramatic sounding way felt like being compared to Picasso himself. And so the more I learned about Picasso from that point on, the more it impacted my own understanding of what I had been through. And so I really tried to structure this story through the lens of that comparison because Picasso was really abusive and problematic, and in my mind really symbolized the toxic beauty standards that especially women are held to. And so I really wanted to compare those things and use Picasso as a way to symbolize reclaiming my own story.
Gotcha. So, and so just for those of you viewing, the specifics are Picasso's Cubist period where everything is all jumbled up. So it's not a flattering comparison. So if you're not really familiar with art, I just want to make it clear. It's not like being compared to like a Renaissance painting. It was definitely not something that especially a sixth or seventh grade girl would want. And I do feel like you captured the feeling of being a kid, being a preteen, the challenges of like trying out for cheerleading and all these different things that everyone goes through or lots of girls go through, and yet you had this whole other layer of challenge that you and your sister were dealing with. Why did you feel like it was important to tell your story as a young adult book as opposed to an adult memoir?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm not honestly sure how to answer necessarily because it wasn't really a conscious decision on my part. I started writing my story, and the first chapter of the book started out as an essay for Narratively. And from that essay, I had a number of agents reach out to me who were interested in considering representing me. And when I sent them, my book proposal everyone kind of said the same thing of, oh, this sounds like a young adult memoir. And I actually didn't even realize that a young adult memoir was a thing a few years ago. And so I just really wanted to focus on the coming of age experience, because for me that was so impactful. Like, that was the heart of my story. And so when every agent that I talked to, and then ultimately the editors we pitched, ended up being really excited about it being a young adult memoir, I figured they were onto something, and I kind of just jumped on board pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And I think one of the reasons why that's great is because I hope more young people will read it, since it's targeted that way and being marketed that way. And I think it's such an important book for everyone to read, adults as well. As I was reading, I was like, this doesn't feel like a book that's for younger people necessarily, but I can totally understand how it would be especially relevant to them. So I think it was a great choice on everyone's part. Do you have a scene or character that you feel captures the spirit of the book?
That's another good question. I feel like there's a lot of different aspects to this book, but I think one of my favorite scenes is just, finding out, spoiler alert, that there was a tooth in my nose, and the interactions between my parents and my brother, and, going to the hospital to get it looked at. I feel like that whole chapter, I believe it's chapter 4, really summarizes my family dynamics, as well as what it was like to kind of feel like, I don't know, a science project in some ways.
Yeah, what you learn about Picasso throughout the book, which I think is a great device, because it's not just your story and your sister's story of these surgeries, but it's also how you're relating it, the sort of braiding it with the story of this artist. So that's one of the reasons why I chose the book for the show. It really took me inside your head, your life experience. It helped me understand what it's like to live with a visible disability, and I think that's an important thing for all of us who don't have visible disabilities to understand. So I just want to thank you for writing a beautiful book that I think will really illuminate a lot of people's lives as well. So the recipe I'm making today is spaghetti with marinara sauce, and after I plate it, and we'll talk about why we chose that, I've asked Ariel to read a passage from the book, and while she's doing that, I'm going to plate up the dish, and then we'll talk about the recipe. So can you set up what you're about to read?
In this part of the book, my sister and I are in our doctor's office, our surgeon's office, and it explores what it really felt like to have our appearance change and to not really relate to that. And so at this time, we're in the 5th grade. I sat on a medical stool in the exam room, still in my camp clothes, as Dr. York pushed the round wire frames of his glasses closer to the top of his nose. His glance remained fixed on the computer next to him, where pictures of my face from every angle covered the screen. The photos had been taken 3 months earlier at the previous appointment. Dr. York had asked me to stand against the back wall of the exam room. "Smile," he'd said, as he held the camera just inches from my face. "Okay, now let's do one without you smiling." I let my face fall, and my mouth shifted into a frown. He had me turn my body to one side, then to the other. "Look up. Now look down." He'd been taking these photos periodically since I was a child. "It'll help us track the progress of your appearance," he always told me. I'd never minded the photos being taken, but that afternoon was the first time I saw all of them displayed. I was fascinated by Dr. York scrolling through the photos on the screen. First, he considered those from my previous appointment, then he viewed before and after shots from each of my operations. Amid images of me with crooked eyes, then less crooked eyes, missing front teeth, then a retainer with front teeth, a flat nose, then a straight nose, I did not see progress, only more flaws I wanted corrected. There had been a time when Zan and I were so identical, I could hardly tell where I ended and she began. In photos from my childhood, I cannot tell you who is who. After our diagnosis, my parents had a portrait taken of Zan and me. For years afterward, it hung in the hallway of the craniofacial unit at the Children's Hospital in Oakland. It was part of the hospital's campaign celebrating patients' unique, diverse faces. In the photo, Zan and I are 3 years old, dressed in matching cream and green dresses that frilled outward at our waists. We have soft brown hair that sits just above our shoulders. Our eyes poke out of our faces so far that just from looking at the photo, I fear they'll fall out. The children in the image seem unbothered and unaware of their differences. They are smiling and happy. Dan and I would walk past the portrait on our way in for surgery. The nurses would often smile and point. "Look, it's you," they'd say, before asking who was who. "That's me and that's Dan," I'd sometimes tell them, but if it weren't for the names on the plaque next to the photo, I never would have known. Because it wasn't our portrait that had been painted over, it was our physical bodies, our faces. And the older we got, the more our appearance reminded us of the change and pain we were forced to endure. Eventually, the nurses stopped pointing to the portrait every time we passed it.
Thank you, Ariel. So I chose that passage because I felt like it was a good setup to the themes of the book and the constant having to go back into different doctor's offices and the surgeries, which are explained and detailed in a. I mean, it just made me hurt for both of you to read those passages and understand what you physically had to go through, and you didn't have the surgeries at the same time, so you would each have the same surgery, but one of you would go first, and so then the other one would wait and watch and watch that person recover, and then her sister recover, and then knowing that you were going to have to go through that as well. So it sort of doubled the trauma that that you both went through. And so I just think it's a remarkable story. So I want to thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people, when they hear, "Oh, you're an identical twin, you went through all that together," like, "Oh, you must be so happy that you guys had each other." And it's like, in some ways, of course, like I love my sister, but exactly like you're saying, it was traumatic on a whole other level to not only experience it, but to watch this person that you love so dearly go through everything as well. And so on one hand, to watch them suffering, but also watch them suffering knowing, hey, that's me soon.
Right.
So
Okay, so I'm going to show off the spaghetti, which is actually angel hair pasta. I need to be clear that it's not actually spaghetti. It's angel hair cooks a lot faster, so I wanted to choose that, and there you go. So we chose spaghetti because one of the themes in the book is food and how often it was very difficult for you both to eat post-surgery, and then there's a whole kind of storyline of your challenge with your weight, and your sister ended up very thin and you ended up overweight because you kind of were dealing with this in a different way. And so you said this was one of the first things when you had the big surgery in 7th grade, that one of the first meals you were actually able to eat that your dad would make you. Is that right?
Yeah. Especially, because part of that summer was spent having surgery on the middle of our face, so our upper jaws got moved forward. And so after that, things kind of felt all out of whack, and it felt really weird to eat, and everything was swollen and numb and painful. And so, yeah, that was one of the foods that I really remember eating a lot that summer, if and when we did eat, because it was warm and comforting, but it was also easy to eat. It didn't require a lot of moving our mouth, and it wasn't painful.
Right. So that's why we chose it for the show, which I think is a really good choice. So this is actually, it's called Mama Capras marinara sauce. It's very garlicky. I found it through a podcast I listened to, The Satellite Sisters, so I'll share that recipe. You get the just very delicious garlic forward sauce is sort of the first thing you taste, then the tomato. Then I added some fresh oregano and basil from the garden, and a little bit of the the Parmesan in the green can, because that's probably what her family would have had. So, and a little bit of black pepper on top. So very savory. There's the bright notes of the herbs, and it just is a very comforting dish. And I was telling her before we started that I'm always happy to have a reason to cook pasta. So thank you, Ariel, for allowing me to cook pasta this morning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, Ariel, thanks again for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You'll find the recipe link on my in the Facebook video comments or on my website, mygreenreliefrecipes.com. Find her at arielhenley.com, And if you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend. Order a copy of A Face for Picasso wherever you like to buy books, and if you don't have a book buying budget, ask your local library to carry it because they buy the books and that helps authors too. Follow me at SWeaverMPH and like my Facebook page so you don't miss an episode. Join us next time for another author interview and a dish inspired by their book. Thanks so much for watching The Blue and Yellow Kitchen.